Hello and welcome to This Week in Review with Nigel Farage. Nigel, the big story this week is one that you've been going on about for years now. I didn't realize how big of an issue it was, but UK net migration hit a record level. Immigration was actually 1.1 million, net migration just over 500,000. It seems to me that the government's solution to the immigration problem is to make the UK unlivable and to encourage people to leave, which is probably not what people had in mind. What do you make of what's going on?
You know, our population has exploded by 8 million since 2001, half of it under Labour, half of it under the Conservatives, and 85% of that is directly down to immigration, which is fine. You're running a big business, you want cheap labour, is great. You want to get a GP appointment, forget it. You want to get your kid into a local primary school in parts of England, forget it. You want to drive up to Birmingham on a Friday afternoon from London, forget it. It'll take you forever. So what we've seen is a diminution of our quality of life. The argument in favour is it's good for GDP. Well, of course it's good for GDP, but is it good for GDP per capita? Has it increased our productivity? It's done none of those things. And it simply hasn't worked. Now, of course, I make those arguments. I'm demonised. Oh, you hate all foreigners. No, there are lots of great people that come and live and work in Britain, and I've employed some of them over the years. But you just cannot have this limitless supply of skilled and unskilled labour coming into the United Kingdom. It is not doing us any good. We need a total rethink. And part of the problem is a lot of people have left the workplace. Those on disability benefits have doubled over the course of the last couple of years, not through industrial injury, but through emotional distress. I mean, I'm sorry, I get a bit old-fashioned about this sort of thing. It's sort of the Harry and Meghanization of the modern world, it seems to me, or just an excuse not to blooming well work. So we're going to have to do something about the work shy in this country through the benefit system. Sorry, sounds tough, but it's going to need to be done. And for the moment, we have both parties committed to a continued open door and an electorate beginning to see fundamental changes in their lives that they don't like.
That connection is very interesting because, I mean, the world used to run an open borders policy. We didn't have passports. You could travel wherever you wanted to, but you couldn't just go and claim welfare there, which was, apart from technology and some other factors, the reason you didn't have these issues.
Milton Friedman was the ultimate free marketeer. And Friedman said, you cannot have free movement of labour between countries all the while there is a social security system. Period.
Let's move on to the weather.
And
the consequences of the weather, because it seems to me that the UK can no longer stand the weather.
So as I speak to you, I'm looking out. It's day 5 of the snow being on the ground here in the North Downs. The sun is out. It's great. And I'm going to go tobogganing on Saturday. I really am. I mean, great. But what happened on Monday was extraordinary. What we've warned about before on this podcast, quite a big high pressure. Renewables at 9 a.m. on Monday morning were producing 3% of our total energy. All this baloney, we go, it's going to be 60%, 80%, well, fine, but it's intermittent and you can't store it effectively. So we were in an emergency situation. And we were importing electricity from Europe. And of course, one day they might need it more themselves, a point that seems to have been forgotten. And the price of electricity from a couple of private companies that had gas stocks that fired them up and put them into the grid traded at 100 times the average for the last 3 years. 100 times the average. And on Monday, every single steel producer in the UK stopped production. Every single one. How this is not a massive story, and I've been covering it.
You're not allowed to cover it, that's why.
But no one wants to talk about it. It's all too difficult. And that just shows you the mess that we in Europe have got ourselves into. And to compound it, BBC website, where else, we learned this morning that HSBC will no longer be doing any lending into the exploration and development of oil and gas. in order to help us meet our climate targets. So we'll still be using the oil and gas, but we'll just import more of it and produce less of it ourselves. And these are the self-inflicted economic wounds that are being put upon this country by this absolute, almost religious commitment to net zero. Look, if you show me that in 5 years' time, hydrogen, if we can change the density of hydrogen, because at the minute it wouldn't work in planes and cars. If you show me a way forward, then I'll be delighted. I've always been in favor of nuclear, but we've done nothing about that for the last 20 years. So we find ourselves in the most extraordinary mess. These huge acts of self-harm being put upon people, massive electricity prices that are wholly unnecessary, the deindustrialization of Britain continuing rapidly, and nobody wants to speak about it. Well, we will.
What bothers me about this most is how predictable a problem it is. So if you've got a large, big interconnected energy grid, then intermittent energy doesn't necessarily have to be a problem because, while we're struggling with wind, France might have wind. But the whole point is that Europe's on the same weather system. If it's not sunny, in the UK, it's probably not sunny in France, and it's probably not sunny in Germany. If it's not windy, it's probably not windy in Europe. And so it's not just intermittent, it's the whole grid's operating on the same intermittency often. And so all of this was obviously going to happen. Yeah. So, how did we get it so wrong?
It's called the madness of crowds. The madness of crowds. Groupthink. Virtue signaling. No one brave enough to stand up to the bullies. And they are bullies, by the way. A couple of events that I've tried to have in the UK to discuss this at public meetings, the police come to me and say, Nigel, we just can't go ahead with this. Such is the level of threat against the alternative. I mean that. Such is the level of threat against the alternative argument being made. So we have eco-zealots, eco-bullies, and frankly, almost eco-terrorists out there. And our MPs and much of our media just aren't brave enough to stand up and make the arguments. And that's how we got into the mess that we're in. However, big change is coming. There's some recent opinion polling saying up to half the population would like a referendum on this. And what they mean by a referendum is a full public debate, a proper, on the table, cost-benefit analysis of what we're doing, because we're being denied that. But you know what? Some of us are doing our best.
Well, I think there's nothing like a cold winter to wake people up. Speaking of the police, I know your friends in the European Parliament are having a bit of a rough time at the moment. Let's focus on whether you think there's going to be any sort of economic or financial consequence out of this, because the EU, they've just stopped sending, or they've just reduced how much money they're going to send to Hungary because of lack of compliance with the judicial requirements, which is incredibly ironic. Will there be any consequences that investors should be worried about?
So we've got 5 socialist MEPs have been kicked out of the group. We've got 1 vice president of the parliament who's been stripped of her position. We've got a former MEP who's been arrested. Oh, I can't, poor chap. He only had 600 grand in cash in his flat. Honestly, they're being most unfair.
It had to be cash too, didn't it? It just had to
be. Oh, yeah, so 1.5 million in cash has been recovered so far. How serious is this? Depends. If they're bribing MEPs to say nice things about Qatari labour laws, then what could the potential for corruption be at the European Commission, who are the government of Europe? All the MEPs do is take the legislation given to them by the Commission and amend it. Depends how this goes. The really big one would be Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, her husband, and her potential involvement with Pfizer. Now, she claims that all of her private text messages between her and Pfizer over the last 2 or 3 years have been deleted. I'm speculating. Is corruption rife in Brussels? Yes. We're shocked by it. Much of Europe isn't. You say to somebody, oh, this Italian MEP took cash. And the Italian says, well, he probably didn't earn very much. It's okay. Here, if the bloke who's approving the local extension to your next door neighbour gets a free lunch, we want him put in prison. There are very different attitudes between, dare I say it, the Protestant North and the Catholic South about money and what public officials can make on the side. So this does not blow the EU apart of itself. unless it gets up to the European Commission level. And if that starts to unravel, as it did in 1998, when the entire Santer Commission had to resign, and hey, who got elected off the back of it? Yours truly, in 1999. So let's see where it goes. But it certainly confirms to me we were right to leave.
Let's hope that doesn't come again. Let's hope we don't have to return.
Oh, please.
All right. Nigel, thanks for joining us. To everyone home, thanks for watching.